like what you believe makes a good company and how you put that into practice. And that's, of course, kind of banal to say, but it also very quickly becomes very real in the things that you've just described. So in concrete terms, I mean, you contrasted, for example, GitLab against companies like, or Doist against companies like, I don't even want to talk about X, but it's...
we know the names.
I just can't even. Yes, exactly.
We don't have to mention them. Yeah.
And so I think a fundamental issue is that the incentives are exact, like these companies are all acting exactly in the way that the incentives are set up. Like Twitter, like many other companies, has been initially driven and made large by VC, where the whole incentive is to drive ginormous profits, because the reality of VC is also that a lot of companies that venture capitalists are investing into are not doing well, and they're at some point just shutting down. And so the companies that do well also have to kind of make up for these losses that are in other companies.
Today's guest is Lena Reinhardt, who has dedicated her career to helping technology leaders build successful engineering organizations. Her background includes roles such as VP of Engineering at CircleCI and TravisCI, along with being a co-founder and CEO of a SaaS startup. She's committed her career to supporting leaders and their teams during times of rapid change and tough market conditions. Lena's supported a diverse range of companies across the globe, from early-stage startups to scale-ups, corporations, and NGOs. She now works as a leadership coach, management trainer, and organizational developer. This episode is brought to you by Swarmia, the engineering effectiveness platform for modern software organizations. Swarmia gives engineering leaders, managers, and teams full visibility into business outcomes, developer productivity, and developer experience. CTOs, VPs, and engineering directors use Swarmia to answer questions like, is the work we are doing moving the business in the right direction? How are our strategic initiatives progressing? With these insights, they are able to proactively eliminate bottlenecks. Engineering teams, on the other hand, use Swarmia to speed up code reviews, identify and fix slow CI builds, and improve collaboration. Swarmia is trusted by hundreds of modern engineering organizations. You can read more and get started with the 14-day free trial at swarmia.com. Hey Lena, welcome and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Luca. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
I'm excited as well. And as you know, you are the very first guest of our brand new podcast. And honestly, I couldn't think of a better guest to begin with. So I'm really excited to have this chat and thank you again.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about sort of kicking off the year. I'm honestly still wrapping my head around this. I had all these great plans of sort of having a strategy and all plans and whatnot figured out for the new year, but well, then reality happened. Yes. And so it's honestly been really interesting for me also to think about, planning for the year and what it means to kind of be in the industry at this point in time and how to make that work.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm excited about the theme that we chose about this conversation, right? So we had a back and forth in the previous days talking about this theme, which is about leading and managing engineering teams while trying to stay human in 2024, where 2024 stands for, the subtext is difficult times. We are living under stressful and under pressure, for at least that's the reality for many teams, many companies. And so to start with, I was curious about your point of view about this, because you're an executive coach, you work with companies all the time, you help them with strategy. So my first question would be, what does the landscape look like from your point of view? Are these difficult times for people in tech indeed?
I loved when you brought up that question, because I think even that question alone, we could probably talk 5 hours about and still not have an entirely clear conclusion. So I would say there are a couple layers that I look at this, like my work is usually essentially about helping people build successful systems of business, tech, humans, and navigate the complexity that comes with those systems. And so I want to just look at it briefly from the systemic side first. So systemic wise, there's of course the question, what is the tech industry even? And then, of course, that industry doesn't exist in isolation. There are a lot of global events that are just rough. A lot of economies are struggling, and all of that is a backdrop, and at the same time, also one of the factors that play into how the tech industry is doing overall. And so when I say this, I'm looking at things that, for example, the interest rates dropping over the last couple of years having contributed to the downturn of a lot of tech companies through just VC money being less available, VC space shrinking essentially, and therefore like a lot of ripple effects kind of causing or happening. Another factor is, of course, still the effects of the COVID pandemic. A lot of startups, scale-ups overhired during that time. So did a lot of corporations. Many of them are still dealing with that. And by dealing with that, it's kind of corporate lingo for are still laying off people that they overhired in 2020 and 2021. I did look earlier at layoffs.fyi. I find a great source for like anything tech layoffs related. We've already had about 8,000 layoffs this year almost, and it's like week 2.5 of January.
It's insane.
And then I think 420,000 roughly in 22 and 23 combined. And it's worth noting there that only about a fourth of those layoffs are estimated to be software engineers. A lot of roles have been in marketing, HR, talent sourcing, but also in sales companies, in sales organizations. Then there's the whole topic of Gen AI, the promise of it versus, the whole question, is this going to take everyone's jobs? There's also, if you're thinking about, hey, are we living in difficult times? There's how are companies performing? And a lot of tech companies, if you look just at NASDAQ, for example, as the trading place for a lot of large tech companies have actually been performing quite well. They had a plunge in 2022, but NASDAQ finished 23 at like 43% up, which is huge. So financially, not all of those companies, exactly, like they're not all in a bad place. But then I think that's sort of the big backdrop. And then the next layer down is, I think, the topic that we're here to talk about today, which is basically just us as people working in this industry, as people being in some sort of leadership function in this industry, where a lot there has changed drastically, like from just the shift in essentially what I would describe more of an employee market to an employer's market. Salaries have gone stagnant or even lower than in previous years. Job availability is different. A lot more engineers are talking about struggling to find jobs or being concerned about their jobs. A lot of companies are pushing for return to office. A lot of companies have been somewhat implicitly squashing unionization efforts in part of this as well. And then 2024 is a big election year. The whole question of like Gen AI and all that is already playing a big role in conversations about this. Like Congress passed some legislation in the US. And then lastly, there is the very individual layer of like, how are we all doing? And then of course, like,
as people,
Exactly. And even so what the tech industry even is for us varies. I mean, I've worked with people across the globe. My clients currently are from the east coast of Australia to the west coast of the US, but like the long distance, not the short one. And what they're experiencing varies greatly. A lot of folks on the west coast of the US have been impacted really drastically with like startups having to do big layoffs, whereas on the east coast it's already been slightly different. In Europe, the impact has been much more varied. So it's not like there is just one quote unquote industry. And that also means the individual impacts just vary quite a lot. So basically to say, I mean, I worked in finance during the 2008 financial crisis, which was not good times either. I found that one bit that's particularly striking at the moment is that similarly to what I experienced back then, the situation is just very complex. There are a lot of different factors going into even just what it means to kind of be in this industry, and kind of keeping up with what's going on in the industry has always been a big part of working in tech. And so it's not like that can just be shut out for most of us. And then there is just the personal of it, in the sense of like, am I able to do my job, have a job, pay my rent and my bills? And what does the day-to-day look like? Am I dealing with, am I working with teams and dealing with employees who are just happily, putting new features out or whatnot? Or am I working all day with people who are scared about whether they are going to be able to pay their bills in the next couple of weeks? And so I think there is a lot where that kind of systemic cannot be separated from the individual. And now I'll pause, because I know that was a long answer to your question.
No, but I think it's incredible that you can articulate how these difficult times get different shapes also in difficult markets, difficult environments, by working with so many different clients. But I think it shows how in different ways this affects both big companies and startups, both US and companies in Europe and in other parts of the world. So it's kind of systemic, but in a different way, in each part of the ecosystem in a different way. And it's particularly interesting to me how these challenging times then shape and the culture and change the way we talk about engineering culture and the way companies are run. And it feels like when bad stuff happens, the natural response is always to, tighten up, to ask more out of people. Or you mentioned return to office policies and reducing benefits and more things. And I feel like in the recent years there has been. There have always kind of been, but it's like a pendulum that swings, sometimes harder and sometimes less hard. Some kind of divide in tech between companies that are more on the calm side, let's say, that do things thoughtfully, asynchronously, remote first, maybe. Think of the GitLab doists of the world, versus companies that are more about hustling, intensity, Elon style, startup culture, being all in the same room, long hours and more. And so it feels sometimes that we should choose between either pushing for more results or caring about the well-being of our team, right? It's an awful choice. But is it true in your opinion, or we can kind of bridge this gap somehow?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of it, isn't it? Because one of the points that I also think about a lot and talk about a lot is generational shifts in the industry. For example, the whole topic of Gen Z folks entering the workforce, progressing over time. At this point, there's also much more millennials in leadership positions. Boomers are starting to retire. And of course, there are a lot of stereotypes and cliches attached with generational discussions. But there are also statistics that, for example, show that folks who are younger, Gen Z, for example, are demanding more and are setting more boundaries and wanting different workplaces and do want workplaces to function in different ways. I think it's not an answer to your question, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. I think right now, my impression is that a lot of companies are essentially somewhat forcing, or at least pushing for people to decide, and they're currently in a position to do so. So basically are pushing for people to decide if they want to work in a way that's very much about that intensity that you described, or if honestly in a lot of cases, basically I would even go one step further and basically say if they're willing to accept the company as it is dictated by the company itself. A lot of return to office mandates I would basically put into the same bucket, where executive teams are essentially oftentimes using those as a way to do layoffs, period, I think. Oftentimes not quite explicitly so. And so I think this shouldn't have to be a choice. I do think, of course, within the larger constraints of companies are there to at least make a zero at the end of the year, in the sense
Yeah.
like, even if it's not big profits, but like not spending more than they're making, that's kind of a thing. And within that, and within all the consequences come of a system that operates like that, I do think it is still, it shouldn't have to be a choice to be a workplace and run a workplace that is not treating humans poorly, and where
Yeah.
people can do a job within all the constraints of, like, I mean, we also have systems that are like inherently like built on racism and other
Yeah.
terrible dynamics. That's not, again, like tech is in isolation. At the same time, it should be possible to have basically decent jobs where people can make a living, and where it doesn't have to be about just grinding people down and burning them out. I think it shouldn't be this way. I also do believe, especially as leaders, it is on us to
Yeah.
push companies to do better. I also know that an individual leader's ability to actually do that and like speak up and try and make better systems for the employees, that ability can be very limited. But yeah, to your question, long way to say, I don't think it should be a choice. But unfortunately, at the moment, it still is for a lot of people, especially if they want to keep a job.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it shouldn't be a choice either. And I think that performance in terms of, how much a team is going to accomplish is a long game, where especially we are all knowledge workers. And I think that software engineering is a creative job, and what goes into the performance and the quality of the output of a creative job is not much about intensity or the number of hours that you put in it, but rather your mental state, how you are feeling, your purpose, how you're feeling well, you're not stressed, that. So I think 4 hours spent in a healthy environment where you're rested and not burned out are worth so much more than, I don't know, long hours in a toxic environment. But then I think you're right that it depends also on individual people, generational things, and different people are motivated by different things. So you can probably build a company hiring only extremely driven people who are happy to work, long hours. Maybe they're young, they have not a lot of family duties and less constraints. And but of course, if you want to build, a resilient, diverse company, big company that can, go through the years, and I think you don't have any choice. The only choice is caring about the well-being of people and the well-being of the environment. I even think, and I'm curious what you think about this. I think that many of these policies that feel a little bit rushed, return to office, and many of these, especially in big tech, feel like more of a reaction to the market and doing what the market and shareholders and expect the company to do, rather than believing that this actually makes things better. Not saying this is always the case, but sometimes there are expectations that you have to do something, and you do what is expected, even though it's not sure that it will bring results.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what you just said, and I would even maybe go one step further, where ultimately there is a question of how you believe, like what you believe makes a good company, and how you put that into practice. And that's, of course, kind of banal to say, but it also very quickly becomes very real in the things that you've just described. So in concrete terms, I mean, you contrasted, for example, GitLab against companies like, or Doist against companies like, I don't even want to talk about X, but it's
We know the
I
names.
just
We don't.
can't even. Yes,
We
exactly.
don't have to mention them. Yeah.
And so I think a fundamental issue is that the incentives are these companies are all acting exactly in the way that the incentives are set up. Like Twitter, like many other companies, has been initially driven and made large by VC, where the whole incentive is to drive ginormous profits. Because the reality of VC is also that a lot of companies that venture capitalists are investing into are not doing well, and they're at some point just shutting down. And so the companies that do well also have to kind of make up for these losses that are in other companies. And so that's the environment. And that, of course, also means I don't think it's impossible, but it's very likely going to attract leaders that believe that this is what's needed, and that set up systems and processes where basically, again, the main employees you can have are the type you described, that are young and have like nothing else that they want from their life, and good for them. But it also sets a tone, it sets a culture for the organization. Whereas companies like GitLab and Doist, I don't know personally how exactly they run, but the way that they are set up, I think Basecamp used to be an example. I have some, but that are set up with the fundamental idea that we want to run a business, we want this business to do well. I mean, Basecamp, even they talk about how they were initially set up from the get-go to make a profit. So because those profits are crucial, but at the same time, they're not there to take over the world. They're not necessarily, their idea is not necessarily to just maximize profits, but to be in it for the long haul. And I think as long as those different systems exist, I think it's going to be very hard. Like if the incentives are already set up that way, it's going to be very hard to really operate in a different way. I don't think it's impossible. I also don't think if your company is VC funded, you can't treat your employees decently. Not at all. I think that's possible. But it's going to mean that at some level, the incentives are going to crash and there's going to be tension.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So let's say that, because you said something before, that is, it's on us, it's on leaders, engineering leaders, to create an environment that is supportive and conductive of good work and is healthy and so on. So let's say we are in a position to do so. So we need to manage under pressure. We are living in challenging times, but we want to do our best to create a healthy team that puts people in condition to do their best. What should we do in terms of, running our team and possibly, I think, taking care of ourselves as well, because we are people, as you said, and we are sometimes the ones that are the most under pressure, maybe from upper levels and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think on the we are people part, that part is often tricky for a lot of us. I mean, I honestly still find it tricky in that just through the positions we're in, the context we have, having direct reports if you're a people manager, or being in a lot of meetings with higher level business leaders because you're a technical leader and you have conversations with them. That comes with institutional power, which also means that we are experiencing even these difficult times often differently. I mean, a lot of managers are informed of layoffs before the employees are.
Yes.
And so that also makes the whole being a human and impacted by those things, but also having some sort of power that makes it tricky. I don't think there are ways to really solve that, but I always find it important to just acknowledge it as a starting point. And so I also think it can be worth looking at essentially what can make the current times practically challenging. And I honestly, I'm also, I'm not above any of this. So and so I would say a couple things that I found are, one part is just keeping up with the change rate of the industry. Mm-hmm. And of course, the change rate of the industry often also quite directly impacts that companies are changing a lot. A lot of startups have pivoted really hard to a new strategy over the last year, or as revenue has changed and whatnot. Then there's, of course, taking people along with those changes, helping them understand what's happening, and contextualizing and talking about frustrations, passing on feedback, those things. At the same time, that's often meant having limited influence. And for a lot of people, like having some sort of impact, control, predictability can be really important. And so that also means that just one of the core needs that a lot of us just as humans have is threatened, which then can trigger like just an amygdala hijack where just our brain moves into stress mode, basically. Then many of us also have questions about our own careers, like what does it mean to be a leader? A lot of companies have laid off a lot of middle managers. Currently, it can be really hard to move into one of those roles if you haven't been in one yet, or even if you have, honestly. And like, what's your career going to look like? And so basically to say one part is just a lot of uncertainty. And like, of course, especially if you're like, or many of us, especially if you have an engineering background, your impulse might also, or instinct might also be to try and remove as much of that uncertainty as possible. But that's just not really possible right now, because so much as we talked about is just at a level that's like, it's like above my pay grade and probably above the pay grade of like anyone really, because we're talking about, you know, VC and interest rates and global financial markets. Like, I don't know. So it's a lot. And so keeping up with that and not being able to really do much about it. And then on the other end, there's a lot of emotional labor, like a lot of difficult conversations. And oftentimes a lot of also figuring out where do I stand versus what does the company need. Like when companies are pushing through return to office policies, for example, and I mean, we all know the statistics that productivity is actually better in distributed and like remote teams, but that's not keeping companies, to your point earlier, it's not keeping companies from demanding return to office. And so you're kind of in the middle between, well, the company wants this to happen. I kind of need to do it, but also I know my employees are going to hate it, and I'm also not exactly a big fan. And that means there's just ultimately a lot of tension that's playing out in that. And so I'm saying all of that quite, spending quite a lot of time on it, admittedly, in just a big part of our job as leaders, no matter if you're a technical or a people leader, is dealing with ambiguity. And the amount of ambiguity that we're dealing with individually and collectively is as high as it's probably been last during the pandemic, but not for a while before that. And that also means we've been dealing with a ton of ambiguity over the last 5 years. And that is hard. That is stressful for a lot of people. And so even just acknowledging that can be a big part of that, because there are a lot of things that we can't individually do much about. And same for the people around us. And I found that that in itself can be quite freeing. And honestly, if you can find people to talk to about this, I mean, the refactoring community is great, could be a great place for that. Like, speak with other people about it as well, because we're all struggling with this. So yeah, what are things that you found that people can do to take care of themselves, or what do you do, Luca?
I think it's hard, and especially because it's hard to assess your own state of mind, your own, whether you're more stressed, you have more energy, because many of these changes in your personal state are not do not happen, all of a sudden. They're like slow changes sometimes, and so they're even hard to detect. So I think when you said talk with other people, check off with each other, how you are feeling. That's very important, because other people may spot changes in your behavior and in how you're doing things that you're not even able to detect yourself. But I think another challenging thing is that I think on a rational level, we all agree that we should take care of ourselves. It's not like there is somebody who thinks we shouldn't.
Right.
But we don't know.
Except for Elon, maybe, but
exactly.
That's unnecessary.
But we don't know to how much extent. We have a ton of other things to do, and maybe sometimes we think we are doing just fine, and so we can just continue to push more work instead of taking some space for yourself. And so I think it's hard to figure out how you're feeling, how you're doing, and adjust your priorities to shift more towards yourself. But I think this ultimately is very important, because I've been a founder. My main professional experience, I mean, my longest one has been that of a founder for almost 10 years. And I think for founders, all of this is amplified in the sense that people really feed off your energy, your optimism, your positivity. So you have to project this to your team. Otherwise, all the other people who work with you adjust, to your own level of energy and activity. And so if you're falling off a cliff, slowly but surely, then all the team gets less things done, and everything happens ever so slowly. And you don't even notice, because it's a slow change. And I think this is true for managers. I mean, for all people in a leadership position, and which makes taking care of ourselves very, very important. But in my experience, the hardest part is detecting these symptoms. So I don't know how you do about this.
I was just going to ask, have you found things that help you detect with how you're doing? Also scan some observability that you've built in?
Yes, yes, I installed some script here, some snippet.
Nice.
For that. Yes. One thing that has helped me, both in my times as in a regular company, and also right now that I'm more of a full-time writer, so I'm more of a loner. It's even harder, It's one thing that helped me is journaling. So writing things down, writing my thoughts down, things that I'm grateful for, things that I'm worried about, random morning thoughts. And when I was a manager, things that come up in one-on-ones and whenever I have chat with people, and then reviewing things that I write from time to time. I think this has been helpful in many departments, let's say, both, for my own even happiness, because being grateful for things, writing down things that I do, I found it helps me, helps my mental state, keeping up with things. And also makes me more aware of patterns of my own behavior that otherwise I wouldn't notice. I mean, because one thing that I've always noticed when I'm more stressed is that there are things that at some point I'm not able to keep up with anymore. Maybe not the core parts of my life, the core things that I do in my life, they're stable, that I keep doing them. But there are, some corner things, some, more fringe stuff that I'm doing less well. Maybe I don't know, ordering more food instead of preparing meals, or I'm working out a little bit more, not just giving up completely, but a little bit more. So you're giving up a few things because you're stressed, you're tired, and it's not about time. It's about more brain space. It's about having the space for doing things. And if I write more things down, there are higher chances that I spot this. And if I talk with people also, your suggestion is great because other people know this also. But I mean, those things that these are have in common is that it doesn't come from you thinking about things. It comes from either, writing on paper or other people telling you. So you have to get out of your own head, I think.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it's a great, the journaling is a great practice, and I love that it's been helpful for you. And I would add to that or expand on it really, to figure out things that are good for you. There is I love the concept of quote unquote boring self-care, in the sense of go for walks, eat decent food, stay hydrated, the things that we all know we kind of need to do, and that are shockingly hard to do consistently sometimes. And so figure out what those things are that are important for you and do them. And this, like, yeah, it's kind of easy to say. I honestly am struggling with this as well. Like, I'm admitting to, well, not hypocrisy, because I at least admit it, but I'm not perfect at all of this at all times. And I've really found the community aspect is really important, because oftentimes there's also a bit of, if you're familiar with the meme, I'll call it, am I the drama, or a reality check? Like, is it me? Am I doing things wrong? Or is it my company? Is it the environment that's quote unquote broken? And that kind of perspective can be really helpful.
Yes.
I would also add, in terms of taking care of yourself, I would encourage you to basically think about how you view your role.
Yes.
And that's something really abstract to say, but you may have heard that there's a bit of a, it's not an outdated view of management, but it's one that's been around quite long, of managers being a fire shield, or a, I'm not going to swear, so I call it a shirt umbrella. So the idea of
managers
or leaders as kind of buffers and as the shock absorbers for the teams. And I will admit that I'm a bit two-minded about this, because I do think there is a bit of a point to this, especially if you're a middle manager. So you have other leaders reporting to you, in the sense that your job isn't to just pass everything that you're hearing from an executive straight to everyone on your teams and expose them to a bunch of ambiguity and probably chaos that's going on. At the same time, you shouldn't be the person who's just eating all of that up and then storing it, and at some point you explode in either a burnout or a rage quit or something else. And this is something that's really hard to do in practice, and that honestly all of us, I think, have to figure out over time on how to do it well. But I always encourage leaders to think of themselves maybe more as a bit of a, I can't think of the word, obviously. It's not necessarily a sieve, but it's more of a membrane. I think that's the one where things pass through, you pass on information to others, but really the function is that of a translator, where you don't necessarily translate everything verbatim, but oftentimes more interpret things for people, which still means you aren't just absorbing all of the ambiguity around you, but you're involving the people in your teams in it. And that's very, core agile and DevOps culture and whatnot. But I do think that part can also be really helpful, because if you view yourself as the person who has to fix everything before it lands with your engineers, you're just going to have a really hard time, and you're very likely going to grind yourself down even further. And, again, ideally, the company around you would be perfectly functioning and everything would be rosy at all times. It's just not how life works. And so it can be worth sitting down and thinking about, what do you value? How do you communicate things? How do you view your work with the engineers on your teams? Is it a partnership where you believe that they also, can know some things that are maybe difficult or that aren't easy to, and don't have straightforward answers?
I think it's a very important topic. I mean, in my experience, I don't think I ever found myself in a situation where I said something to my team. I mean, I passed down some information and then I regretted it. In doubt, I found it always better to over communicate and then keeping things for myself, because I think that keeping things for yourself, thinking that maybe you're protecting your team, kind of always means you're trying to babysit people that instead are more than capable of handling whatever you're keeping from them, and even helping you in handling this probably. And also because on the other side there are people who are probably fearing that you're holding something from them. I mean, they are living in this ambiguity. So I think sometimes it's hard because, as you said before, especially in big companies, there are things as a manager that fly over your head you don't even know yourself. So like in layoffs cases. I mean, in many cases, managers don't know anything about what is going to happen in their teams. But I think it's healthier and creates a better, environment to just, say transparently that you don't know. You don't know, and you will tell them as soon as you know something. And these are all the terms and all the things that you know and don't know, rather than messing around, not being a little bit shady, because I don't know, maybe you're embarrassed, and it is that you should know. It's totally human and natural, but bad news that is transparent is honest and is better than ambiguity. I mean, ambiguity is particularly killer. I love that you use this term because people get uneasy with that and creates a lot of stress. So I agree with this. And I also think that sometimes a lot of stress doesn't necessarily come from the amount of work, but from these circumstances. So you don't get sometimes burned out because you work long hours, but you work maybe normal number of hours, even maybe fewer than other people, but it's stressful, or you don't see your purpose, you don't see a lot of impact, or you have to deal with ambiguity. So we associate burnout with too much work, but it's not always the case. Maybe not most of the cases even.
Yeah, and I think even recognizing the signs of burnout and knowing what those are and what they look like in yourself as well as in others can also be an important part of this. Obviously not therapists or like qualified to do diagnosis, but being able to spot certain patterns around it can be really helpful. And I would also add, I like the way you put this, where like a lot of leadership is like starts with knowing yourself. And if you want a sort of framework for thinking about this, I can highly recommend the Biceps framework by Paloma Medina. It's about human core needs. It's also a beautiful acronym. I can put a link in here shortly. I think I have it in my browser history right there. And the core needs that it outlines are, for example, belonging, predictability, which goes to like struggling with ambiguity, for example, but also fairness, equality, and usually most folks have sort of two to three core needs that are really strong. Not everything's equally important for everyone, and so understanding that can give you a really helpful framework for recognizing your own reactions and for even just noticing and putting words to, oh, this is triggering my need. For example, like I'm a structured person. I've had troubles like learning to deal with ambiguity, but I had to because I've been working in startups for 15 years now. But for me, at some point, being able to put words to that and just say, oh, okay, this is triggering a core need of mine, which is predictability. How can I deal with that now? And it can also be a great framework to talk with your teammates. Paloma has coaching exercises, even a team check-in. I'm not getting paid to say any of this. It's an open source. It's released under Creative Commons license. But having words and understanding for yourself and the people that you're working with can be really helpful in just navigating, sort of dealing with a lot of ambiguity, with a lot of change.
Yeah, please then leave the link in the comments, and I will put it also in the podcast episode. I'm excited to check it out, and also I take the chance to tell everybody in the audience if they want to write some questions. There's been quite a conversation actually. I'm scrolling the comments between Chris and Abdullah Had, so I will catch up with that. And then in the meantime, if you have specific questions, please leave them here, and we will pick them up later. And while you were talking, Lena, I was thinking, so we have said that we should work on this, on improving the environment, on making it healthier for yourself as a leader, as a manager, and for people on your team. But then, as we all know, aside from this, you have all your other duties, as a manager that comes with, hiring, planning, dealing with all the daily work. So my question is, and I think that resonates with many people, how do you invest in improving this kind of environment? How do you invest in these things? How much do you invest in that as opposed to, doing other work? And how do you do it on a practical level? Even, tips or tricks, I think, are very useful here.
Yeah. So honestly, that question is one I've grappled with often in my career, and I would also want to start answering this by saying, if you're a leader who has people reporting to you, don't stay longer than you can in order to protect the people working on your team. And I say that not just because I've done this, so I've stayed in roles longer than I should have because I thought it was a way to protect the people working with me. But I also hear that from a lot of leaders who are burnt out, who are exhausted, who feel like things are not getting better in their roles, whatever their reasons are, but who also tell me, hey, I'm staying for another couple months, half a year, because I'm afraid that if I leave, things are going to get really bad for the employees. And I get that. I also am going to walk slightly back what I said initially. Like, obviously, you make the choices you make. I would just say that the motivation is great, but I've also seen a lot of people do really bad damage to their own well-being and to their own health, especially as a result of that, out of the motivation to protect their employees. Organizations are set up to function without you.
Yeah.
Things may be staying, or things may be not going as bad immediately. If you stick around, at the same time, you're maybe just delaying the inevitable. And at the same time, there's also what you mentioned earlier, Luca, around we're all adults in these workplaces, and people have to make their own choices, and protecting them from bad things that are happening around you is not going to help them in a really sustainable way either. This is a difficult topic, but I also, especially a lot of leaders who really care about their employees, tend to do things like this, and it can just get really dangerous. That's why I wanted to say that.
Yeah.
And that also includes how much work you're putting into changing things. I will say the whole question of like how much can you actually change such an environment is tricky. Because of course the first part that you have to ask yourself is basically, what is your area of impact or influence? You know, for example, and what do you care about changing? If, for example, I've been in a lot of higher level leadership roles, I work with a lot of people in executive or senior manager positions. For them, the main area where they can actually have substantial impact is the people who are reporting to them, who are in the teams that are below them in the organization, and they want to do best by those people. At the same time, they might be able to give feedback on an HR policy, but that's it. And that feedback might get ignored, or someone may say, well, we're going to do it anyway. And so I think it's really hard to answer in general. I would say my general rule of thumb would be invest as much as you want to, invest as much as you can do in a way that's not going to ruin your own well-being. And also, if you're in a mode where, okay, things are not great here, I'm going to do what I can to be able to look at myself in the mirror in the next months, and, you know, make decisions that are aligned with my values, then, you know, that's also fine. You don't have to try and change the environment you're in. So yeah, I think it's really tricky, but I feel like it's a question that a lot of people struggle with. I mean, yeah, how have you dealt with this, or what do you recommend to people?
Lena, sorry, can you hear me? Can you see me? Because I've lost you for a few seconds. I think it was my my bad.
Yes, I can hear you and see you, and was just asking you what you think. So this is perfect.
No, I think while you were while you were speaking, I was thinking that when you mentioned that there are things that are out of your control, so you have to make peace with that and recognize the boundary of, you know, your impact. And then if you feel like you have to go, you don't have to feel that you're, you know, letting down your team or not protecting your team. I think this is very true, and it's like there are versions of this type of reasoning at any scale, because the largest is like of this type of decisions is, can I leave my role or this company or this team or not? And then there is like a smaller scale that is, can I take time off? Because many people resist
Love
that,
that.
and it's type of the same thing. And then there is, the daily version of this that is, okay, should I work long hours, or can I just, leave at 5 p.m. and trust that things will be okay? And I think that the reality check is that in most of these situations, when you take the road that leads to taking more care of yourself, you figure out that nothing disastrous really happens. Actually, I mean, people turn out fine, and if you don't work till 8 p.m., if you take time off, if you leave your role. So I mean, when in doubt, choosing for your own well-being is safe, I would say. So I agree with your take, and that's something that I've heard over and over, and it ties with detecting your own emotional state, and also finding your own non-negotiables, your basics of taking care of yourself. That I think and I think it also sets a good example for people that work with you. I mean, you set an example as a manager, the way you work, how much you work, how much you don't work, for people to feel they have permission, to work a little bit less, to take time off. So your behavior is crucial in shaping that kind of environment. So if you work too much thinking that you're protecting people, you should also think that you're projecting that maybe they should work as much, and that's not what you want, but that's what maybe they're receiving. And so you should set an example in that as well.
I think that's a really good call out, like the example you're setting, as well as the point you made about how it's not just in the big decisions, but also just in the day to day. And I think to kind of one point that everything we've talked about so far, between like taking care of yourself and of your team, and then like the environment, the common denominator is that ultimately a big part of, I think, honestly, doing okay as a leader this year, or even like thriving, succeeding, whatnot, is like, don't make things dependent on you and you alone. Like, I think, and in my experience, effective leadership is about being able to build systems that work. And building systems also means that you're not the bottleneck. You're not the person that everything relies on. You're not the person that has to sign off on everything. There are people and there are processes and structures. Even simple things like, does everyone have to go to this one meeting every week to hear about the status of projects, or is there some place where they can just go look whenever they need that information? I don't, by the way, like, I don't care if you have meetings or not. I know other people have spicy thoughts on this. I don't. Make them useful, and your meetings are going to be fine. But the point being, instead of answering to 10 different people about the status of projects, give them a place to look. Instead of being the person that writes development plans for all your direct reports, like, the people on your team can do that themselves. They know where they want to grow their career. Yes, you should give them feedback. Yes, your job is to make sure they get opportunities where they can grow their impact. Yes, but you're not the person who has to handhold everyone on your team through this. You're also not the person who has to keep all the information about how the company is doing to themselves, and then spoon feed it sort of mama bird style to your employees. Again, like, they are adults. Yes, they may struggle with it, but also they should know. They deserve to know. And so think about systems, processes, structures, pulling more people in, delegating things, instead of thinking that you have to have all the answers. Like you mentioned that earlier, which I thought was great, and thinking that you have to have it all figured out. Because in terms of honestly leading in times that are highly ambiguous, that are challenging, that are complex for a lot of us, not having everything have to go through you is a huge part.
Yeah, I agree 100%. But I think, that this is not easy for many people because it requires letting go some ego, because, when there are things and communication flows that pass through you, but even, it's not a, toxic thing. It's just that you think that you associate your own value, with the thing that you are doing these things. That's your place, while instead you should replace that mindset with the fact that you're creating systems, you're even if you're a manager, you're not making, software maybe anymore. You're not a maker of software anymore. You're a maker of systems and processes that have to work with as least friction as possible, possibly without you or with minimal involvement. I remember one investor of mine told me once that one of the main duties of a founder is to replace yourself continuously. That is being very, self-aware of what are the times that you spend, the things that you spend your time on, and then either continuously, automate them or delegate them to somebody else. And while, I mean, maybe for a founder, this is extreme because startups need to scale and grow all the time, etc. I think that is true for managers as well, that they need to create processes that work better and better without, the need for human input and meetings and synchronous communication and stuff. So I think it's a healthy mindset to adopt.
Well, and it's also, I think you briefly touched on it. So I think the advice you got is great. I think that puts it really well. And I think there's also a part that's really hard in that, like, a lot of sort of stuff about leadership that gets thrown around. It's like, oh, what do managers even do? Or, they're just sitting in meetings all day. What the heck? What is that even worth? Like, there's a lot of people just talk a lot of crap about that. But I don't want to really speak to this. But I think there is a really tricky part in that, especially if you've been an engineer for a long time, like feeling like you're doing a good job and like you're succeeding and doing great is drastically different in those kinds of leadership roles.
Absolutely.
Where it gets not necessarily about shipping stuff. A lot of the work you're doing is just never finished. It's just a lot of people things, a lot of business things, and it's like, it's a lot. I talk about this work in a very I talk about a lot of hard aspects of this work. Just to be clear, I really love it, but it's still draining sometimes. And so, basically, there is a part where it's also about letting go of your ego and of the need to have your work kind of seen and recognized. And instead, I mean, I view my job as building an environment where other people can shine. Where people can do great work, teams can do great work, and so can organizations. And that also means that it's not about me. Yes, there are things where I show up more visibly in the sense of like I may, talk about our strategy, or I may check in with people on how things are going, or set direction in communications, kind of the job anyway. But a lot of it is just in the background. And honestly, some of the biggest accomplishments in my career are known by maybe 2 people. And those people are my boss and one other person who was involved. And that's going to remain the case forever. And that's been interesting because, like, I will admit that, I mean, I too have an ego. I like to, get praise for my work. I think most people do to some degree. But it also means, and that's why I like the way you described this. There is something about it's work that is about being very humble and about being good with doing work that you think is right and that you think is going to lead to the results that the business needs, that the people around you need, and at the same time not doing it for the recognition. And I think that's great, and I think that's really a pillar of this work, because also, like, the people who know, they will recognize. And I always encourage leaders to keep like a document with feedback and praise that they're getting,
Yes.
I have one that's like 10 years old now, and honestly, like, sometimes I need to look at that to remind myself of like why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
But that also means like in just adjusting your compass as to like what matters, and that can also be just a tough transition.
Yeah, that's another version of journaling. I one of the best advices that I got as a inexperienced manager was to keep like an accomplishment journal. You know, a list of things
Yeah.
that are either praise that you receive, also things that you're proud of that you have done, even if nobody knows. You know, and reminds you of your impact, of the things that you have done. Because it's true that for managers sometimes you do work that is not very visible, and you can struggle with that because it's true that many people say, I don't know what this manager does all the time, but you yourself can struggle with this and trying to understand what's your place and what's your worth. Actually, I'm hopeful about this to improve over time, because what I'm seeing is that with technology, of course, and progress, the more mundane parts of a manager work, let's say, moving stuff around and dealing with project management stuff, is going more and more away. It's it's going to be more and more automated, and we are keeping instead the core of the fact that you're mentoring people, coaching, sponsoring them, taking care of the growth of your team. These things are never going away, and I think they're going to be a larger and larger part of people, of managers' work, and are the things that are worth the most. But yes, it's tough anyway.
Yeah, and I would hope so too. And I think the other kind of big skill and part of the work that I don't think is going away is the context bit, where like organizations have so much data, even in terms of project status or employee engagement surveys and whatnot. I'm sure there's going to be more and more tools that attempt to do this, but I keep seeing that one of the biggest values that leaders can add is by providing context.
Yes.
That includes, I mean, you also touched on the transparency bit a couple of times, like painting a picture for your teams of where things are at, where things were, how far you've come, and where you're going.
Yes.
I always compare it to like a hiking guide. You look at the map, you have the big red dot of like, we are here. And then you look at, hey, what are the surroundings? What's going on? What are the plans now? Which turns are we taking? And that contextualization, or even saying, hey, here are 5 reports. Here's what those numbers mean. Here's what those numbers mean in the context of everything I'm hearing from the employees. And so that painting a picture, both in managing up, like how you talk to your boss, as well as like what you share with your employees. That's a really important part. And I'm hoping that basically having to spend less time on like cramming numbers into spreadsheets is going to mean that people and leaders are going to have more space to like think about that context and how to share it with people in a way that is maybe motivating, engaging, but also transparent, and taking them along with changes as they're happening.
Absolutely. I agree that good managers and good leaders often act as good, translators and of this kind of context between their reports, between the levels they're managing up with, and it's a crucial role. So I think we have to wrap up. But I think this was a great conversation, Lena. So thank you so much for being our first guest and for taking the time today. Thank you to everyone who showed up. It's about 10 people here. So thank you for the great chat that you have also here. So
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who was here. I loved seeing the chat comments fly by. And like, if you're someone who's, trying to figure out what to do this year, I really just want to say you've got this. Like, that it's hard, and at the same time, like, you're working your way through this. And so that alone is worth acknowledging. So thank you so much, Luca. It's been a great pleasure and an honor.
Pleasure has been mine. Thank you again, Lena. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day, and talk soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.